Good morning. I'm Muriel Bowser, and I am joined today by members of my team, and we are happy to be having the Mayor Council breakfast. I first want to start by thanking the entire team here at Clyde's at Gallery Place for hosting us today. Let's give them a big round of applause. And today we will be discussing two important topics that we know will require strong collaboration between executive branch agencies and the legislative branch, and that is downtown DC and public safety. A few weeks ago, I announced the Gallery Place Chinatown Task Force, which is co-chaired by Jody McClain and Debbie Ratner-Salzberg, two outstanding leaders in our business and development community who have taken the bull by the horns and will provide you an update today. I want to thank them for saying yes very quickly and for getting to work very aggressively. I also want to thank the members of the council for unanimously co-sponsoring legislation that would allow the district to partner with Monumental Sports for a innovative renovation in place of their downtown arena. So we know that we will continue to need to move legislation through so that we are prepared for the district to remain at the table. I also want to just say a couple of things about the narrative about downtown in 2024. We are not in the middle of the pandemic anymore. This is not 2020, and our downtown is not a ghost town like some people say. The reality is that businesses continue to move downtown. We continue to have tenants expand their footprints. And we continue to have restaurants open. And in fact, we were just recognized for opening more restaurants per 100,000 people than any other major city in America. We were also recently recognized for leading the nation in office to housing conversions. And 1 week ago, Metro had its highest morning commute since the pandemic. So we know that we have to continue to stay focused and be innovative and set a big vision, and we are looking forward to working with each one of you to do exactly that. We know that the downtown is not just important to Ward 2, though it is important to Ward 2. It's important to the entire city to ensure that we can make the investments in schools and parks and transportation that we are so very proud of. So, of course, we will need to stay focused on the future of downtown and the discussions around Gallery Place and Chinatown, build on our discussions around the Downtown DC Action Plan and the Public Realm Plan. So we look forward to hearing from Jody and Deborah and Deputy Mayor Albert on how that proceeds. And I, too, want to thank the Committee on Planning and Economic Development for advancing Deputy Mayor Albert's nomination, and I want to thank the Council for her swift confirmation. We'll also hear from Deputy Mayor Donahue and Deputy Mayor Lindsay Appiah on public safety updates, and it goes without saying that the public safety of our residents and visitors is our top priority. I want to thank you, Councilmember Printo, for having a very comprehensive look at the bills before you in advancing the Secure DC Omnibus. And I urge the Council to swiftly pass this legislation as well. With that, I want to pass it to Chairman Mendelson for opening remarks. But before I do that, I want to thank MPD and regional law enforcement for bringing to close a tragic crime spree that took the life of a D.C. resident and leaves another D.C. resident in critical condition in the hospital. The officials in Maryland will say more about the resolution of those crimes, but I'll just say this, that we have to do something about guns in America and making sure that people who have no business having a gun don't have access to guns. So with that, Chairman Mendelson, let me turn to you for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. I think folks are anxious to get to the items on the agenda, so I'm not going to have a long opening statement. In fact, I have just notes here, but I will say, since you ended on a note about guns, the district is fortunate that we have one of the strongest gun control laws in the country. Unfortunately, we are constantly on guard because of because of court challenges and trying to stay ahead of the changing jurisprudence with regard to guns and public safety. But the council has always been committed to ensuring that we have the toughest gun laws that we can. You had mentioned, Mayor Bowser, a couple of bills which are pending. There is the public safety bill, Secure DC, which Councilmember Pinto reported out of her committee. I think everybody here knows this, but for anyone else, that that legislation is pending, and the first vote will be next Tuesday. And I'm not optimistic that the council, after a lot of debate and maybe a few amendments, will be adopting that legislation. We have another bill pending which you touched on, and that is last December you introduced and all of the council members co-sponsored legislation to make clear to Monumental Sports that we continue to be receptive to their staying here. And I wish no ill on anyone, but if the deal falls through in Virginia, we're ready to pick up, and that legislation is ready to go at that time. I also just want to say that I appreciate that a topic of this meeting is to talk about public safety and where we are on that. And Mayor Bowser, if you want to meet again with council members, I'm certainly open to that, and I think all the members are, to discuss maybe in more granular detail public safety issues. With that, I want to thank everyone, and back to you.
Thank you. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Nina, Jody, and Debbie.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you so much, Chairman Mendelson. If we could move to the next slide. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the context of the task force. How does it fit into the Downtown Action Plan? How does it relate to the Comeback Plan? So I'll present that very quickly before I turn it over to Jody McLean and to Debbie Ratner-Salzberg to talk about the task force itself. Also, there's some work streams and what the goals of those work streams are, and then to talk about next steps. Obviously, we're here to answer your questions and look forward to them. Next. So there are a number of different plans that have been put forth, and every plan advances a component of the prior plan. So I think that this is sort of a nice visual. The first framing document that was published over a year ago is the Comeback Plan. This is the 5-year economic development strategy for the district as a whole. We are executing within DEMPED along the different recommendations and actions identified in the Comeback Plan that are comprehensive in nature. What we're looking at, and what I'm setting us up for today, is a conversation about downtown. And so if you shrink down kind of into the middle of the district's footprint, the downtown DC bid, as well as the Golden Triangle bid, in partnership with the Federal City Council, sponsored and have been, over the past year, developing a downtown action plan. That downtown action plan looks specifically at a defined geographic area that goes from approximately Union Station, which we're calling Downtown East. It goes through Gallery Place, into Golden Triangle, and all the way over to Foggy Bottom. So when you think about that broad swath, that's a huge area of downtown, and they've identified a number of different components within it, as well as different nodes, geographic nodes, and applying how to implement different actions and different solutions for the downtown. That plan is going to be published at the end of February, and we look forward to that. Concurrently, the Office of Planning developed a public realm plan, which is really to take a look at our infrastructure and our park system throughout downtown. It is relevant because we have, on average, 22 million visitors a year that come into this city. And we want to draw them up and into our neighborhoods and it requires a walkable as well as engaging experience in order for people to move off the mall into Gallery Place, off of the White House into Farragut Square. And so that's what the public realm plan is. It's more of a visual document, an organizing framework for how we pull people and engage them and keep them in our city to enjoy food, theater, entertainment, other offerings after they've had a great day on the mall. So that plan, the public realm plan, will also be published at the end of this month. So you'll see both the Downtown Action Plan, which are a series of actions that are being recommended by the business community, together with the public realm plan, which I think will be a very powerful combination. So the Gallery Place Chinatown Task Force is what I would call a focused neighborhood strategy plan. And if we can move to the next slide, I actually kind of went through this, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much. You have the slides. But in the DC's comeback plan, here are some of the major targets that, as I said, are comprehensive. If we move to and it's a 5-year goal. The next slide is the Downtown Action Plan, and this better describes these different nodes within the downtown and the geographic area that the Downtown Action Plan encompasses. And I'll point to the 5 foundational elements which you can see are comprehensive. Transportation, taking a look at building a better residential mix within downtown. Also, how do you make the District of Columbia the place of choice to locate and do business? Stemming and addressing public safety, and then the actions to actually implement and make it happen. So as you can see, the layout of downtown is broad, and what the task force is doing is really focusing and fixating on one of these 5 nodes, which is Gallery Place Chinatown. The next slide, please. I had mentioned the Public Realm Plan, which is being published by OP. Again, this is really much more of a focus on how we maximize use of our public space, namely sidewalks and parks, to draw people through downtown. And there are actually some pretty revealing and exciting things that I hadn't discovered or knew before, and I'll just share one of them to tease everybody, which is that to walk from Gallery Place Chinatown to Foggy Bottom is only 1.1 miles. It's a 20-minute walk. If you walk along I Street, every 2 blocks, there's a public park. I don't think I've ever thought of it that way. So those are the kinds of insights that the Public Realm Plan is looking into. Okay, next. So that's going to bring us to the Gallery Place Chinatown Task Force. And again, if you can really imagine that this is a neighborhood-focused plan so that we can think of our downtown as submarkets rather than a monolith, that's the future that we're moving toward. The Wharf, Navy Yard, Noma, Union Market, these neighborhoods that are vibrant today are vibrant because they have a curated experience and a unique mix of uses within those neighborhoods. When you look at the geographic footprint of any of those neighborhoods, it really is akin to Gallery Place Chinatown, to Golden Triangle, or to what I'm calling my new term, Penn West, west of the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue to Foggy Bottom. So the key, what we've learned from our own neighborhoods as to what breeds and activates and creates success, is that you've got to curate those experiences for the user, for the person who's going through there, and it helps to think about it as curating that experience in nodes. So we hope the Gallery Place Chinatown Task Force will set the example of how we do this, and then we would transport this type of working together to really focus on Golden Triangle, to really focus on Penn West, again, to create that vision long-term that people within those neighborhoods, the owners that own property, the businesses that are within there, and the residents that we want to attract can really see themselves there. With that, I'll turn it over to Jody and Debbie. Thank you.
I'll start. Good morning. Thank you, Nina, Deputy Mayor, for having us here. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chairman. I would just start by saying I am really excited to be working on this. I'm excited to be working next to Debbie, who probably, I was thinking about this last night, is a little bit more of a legend in our field. So I'm excited to have this opportunity to be working so closely with her. I love DC, I love the city, and I love the opportunities, I think, that are sitting in front of us. As we think about how we really focus on this district, to be driven as a national destination, but I think even more importantly, as a really vibrant, inclusive economic engine for this city. We do attract 22 million tourists. What are we doing with those tourists? This is an opportunity for us to attract incredible talent that wants to be in this city. It's a chance for us to bring jobs to this city, and it's a chance to attract residents and students to this city. So I think what we see in front of us is great opportunity with some immediate need to make sure that we focus on stabilization for Gallery Place, Chinatown District, that instills a sense of safety and instills a sense of predictability. The one thing I know is people like surprise and delight, but they absolutely need predictability to have the perception of safe and to want to spend time and to dwell and come back. From that, I think our second mission, the second thing we're focused on, is creating a long-term vision for this area that will start with the 2 blocks of Capital One Arena and Gallery Place, but really work throughout this whole district. As the deputy mayor has laid out, encompasses just about 27-ish blocks that will be deeply impacted by what happens at these 2 blocks. Debbie will go into detail, but hopefully we will slow down to come up with a vision that is not only one that is exciting and vibrant, but it's one that we can execute and make sure that we think about what it will take to execute that. We've put together a group that will focus on investments, incentives, so that this vision really does come to life. And we'll think about marketing and our communication approach, and that includes all of you that are here. I know we've had a lot of one-on-one meetings. Happy to make sure that you are included as we think about that, as well as making sure that the public is included on that as we think about that. The planning area, just to be sure that we're clear on this, really starts just south of the Convention Center, and it runs from the Convention Center down to Pennsylvania Avenue, bounded then by 10th Street and 5th Street. This is an amazing area that today is home of over 1,100 businesses. Almost 30,000 people call this their home for employment, for work, provides a lot of jobs. There are about 3,800 residents who live here. That means 2,300 households, 563 families who live here. It's also home, as we all know, to the Capital One Arena, Gallery Place, the Portrait Gallery, the MLK Library, the Shakespeare Theater at Sidney Harmon Hall, the Navy Memorial, and the FBI headquarters. So this is an area that is vibrant, that right now I think we need to focus on the long-term vision. As Debbie and I and the Deputy Mayor have started into this task force, one of our first moves was to bring together a steering committee that had a lot of diversity, a lot of people who were experienced both working in the city, but also had a really broad perspective. So this is the steering committee that we've brought together. All the names are on the slides. I think they've been previously discussed. So this is a group that we will lean on as we think about what our long-term strategy is here, a group that hopefully strategically will keep us all focused on what we're doing, and a group that over time we will work very closely with.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as Jody mentioned, first of all, let me say that I am equally happy to be here and very excited about the opportunity that is presented to us. And it has been an interesting experience to get started because Jody and I were called by the mayor and immediately said yes, because we love the city and we look forward to making sure that the city continues to be the nation's capital, a vibrant and exciting place to be. But what's been, I think, inspiring to both of us is every person that we have called, and you're going to start hearing about a number of them, has responded with a yes. So it's really probably been the most exciting non-paying job I've ever had. So with that, Jody mentioned that we have a steering committee. The steering committee will be meeting monthly and really gives us advice, is strategic, and will jump in where necessary and where they have expertise. But the day-to-day work of the committee is being done in 4 work streams, or as we call it, as you can see in front of you. The first is activation, because that is really the key of making sure that people are comfortable coming down to this neighborhood and have exciting things to do. Under activation, and you can see the people who are leading this committee, we are coordinating clean and safe activities and resources so that people do feel comfortable, because as the mayor said, public safety is our top priority. We will also be working on immediate and longer term permanent activations to keep people excited about coming down here. Jaron, Angie, and Richard are building out their committee, but they really will be the first group that will be active and getting our programs going. Next, Jody, Andy Altman, and I are responsible for leading the vision group as well as the entire task force. The vision is focused on the blocks of Capitol One and Gallery Place. However, we are looking at this vision, as Jody mentioned, in the context of the larger area, which goes from the Convention Center down to Pennsylvania, from the Business Museum to 10th Street. And the goal really is to bring people down from the Convention Center through Gallery Place down to Pennsylvania Avenue and all the way to the mall, to bring people obviously up as well, and to bring people to both the building museum node as well as to what's going on at City Center, because as Nina mentioned, we have very active nodes already existing in the city, and we need to make connections and keep these nodes exciting, inviting, and vibrant. So our goal is to come up with a vision, what's going to happen here in these 2 blocks within this area. But it's not just to come up with a vision that sits on somebody's bookshelf. It's to come up with a vision that is implementable. We need to be able to execute what we come up with. So we have a group looking at investment and incentives. They'll be looking at tools that we have already in the city, tools that are used nationally. How do we invest and make sure that the plans we come up with are actually executable? And importantly to our residents as well as to our tourists and those coming, we need to be able to market and talk about this neighborhood in a very positive manner about what's going on and our future plans. So we have a group that is working on branding, neighborhood concepts, and really communicating what we are doing as we move forward. We have every intention of being transparent, open, and very communicative. So we are executing our work streams through roundtables, just as so that you know we have. I like to say as we get into January, we talked about task force kickoff. So we've had our first meeting. We will be meeting monthly. In February and March, we talk about getting smarter and setting the table. We will be doing this through roundtables of experts to give us knowledge. We, as Nina mentioned, we already are basing our work on the Downtown Action Plan, the Public Realm Plan, and on the housing and downtown regulations. But we will also be starting today meeting with groups in roundtables, and these are the roundtables we have right now, but they will be changing and growing as we learn. Today we are starting with broker mandates. Who's out there? What are they looking for? Where are they going? And what can we do to attract them? We have a meeting next week on activation and arts. What can we do in this neighborhood today to bring more people? We know people, for example, love the holiday market. How do we think of other things to do and attractions to bring people in? That will lead to a culture and entertainment roundtable because this is a neighborhood that is flush with culture, and we need to make sure that we are taking full advantage and bringing in their expertise. We will have a developers roundtable to bring in the real estate world, an adaptive reuse roundtable talking about the arena. What could be anchors for the arena if we keep the arena, and how would we reuse it if we decide to go that way? Other roundtables will include education and civic anchors in terms of what could come into the market, housing, and of course a market on stakeholders, with stakeholders, commercial, retail, and hotel owners. All of this is going to be done within the lens of tourism because, as Jody mentioned, we bring in so many tourists, and it is an important part of our work. So our final roundtable will be big thinkers. So we have been talking to people like Richard Florida. We've been in constant contact with Bloomberg and with Brookings, and we will make sure that we are bringing in the big ideas from around the country and as well as from around the world. All of this will occur based on this next step schedule. It started, as I mentioned. So we have our first roundtable today. We've had numerous calls with experts to begin laying out our plans. The rest of this month in February, our verticals and the people that you saw leading them are working on their development plans for their committees. So we will have deliverables and goals from each committee. The Clean and Safe program will kick off in February, although it is actually already working. And I should have mentioned that each one of these task forces, the verticals, has a DEMPED member working with it. So there is a government worker as well as somebody from the government who can help make sure that the plans we come up with are actionable immediately as we need them and can really help us work together to produce our ultimate vision. In February, the Downtown Action Plan will be published by the government, the Public Realm Plan, and the Housing and Downtown Regulations. So we will be setting the table for March and April where our real work will begin, when we will be formulating our vision, working with others, or our visions, I should say. We will start trying to work on what are the options, what are the possibilities, and that will begin in April and May. And our hope is that by May, we will have a vision or visions that we can bring forward to experts, as well as beginning to bring in more people from the public and neighborhoods. But we will, as I mentioned, already have stakeholders, and we'll continue to meet with all of you, as well as the public and the expertise in the area. Our goal is that by September, we will have a plan that's actually ready for market feedback and beginning to look at. We will have looked at implementation, but we will be making certain that the plan is implementable. And once we have all of this feedback, we hope that by the end of the year, probably a little earlier, we will be able to present a vision or visions to the community.
Thank you, Debbie and Jody. Before we take questions, I just wanted to end with this. The Gallery Place Chinatown Task Force is very timely for a number of reasons. One is the monumental sports announcement. But there are other reasons to be working on this part of downtown first. The NCPC, the National Capital Planning Commission, is about to launch their Pennsylvania Avenue visioning. They're envisioning it as a festival area to really be a center place where where DC can host festivals. That work is kicking off shortly here. If you take a look at what that could be and where the concentration of festival activity, main stages is, it's really along Pennsylvania Avenue, right at the base of Chinatown, right at the base of the FBI headquarters, which we know in sometime in the future will also be another 5-acre site available for redevelopment. So it is very timely to be thinking of this node first, because there's actually a couple bookends. There is the Gallery Place and Capital One Arena site that, if Monumental Sports stays, as we all hope that they do, and as the door is open to them to do, that we have a very dynamic neighborhood that draws upon what I am hoping is not 22 million visitors in the future, but potentially 40 million people in the future, which helps us diversify our economy. So all of these actions really are starting to fit together. If Monumental Sports does not come or stay, we have a runway here in which we can continue to develop plans. That site becomes one site. The other bookend to Chinatown Gallery Place is the FBI site, and an anchor of the convention center, and a concentration of theaters that makes this area also akin to a theater district. So when you look at that together, the timing and the impetus and the economic reasons to focus on Gallery Place Chinatown first makes a ton of sense, because all these plans are coming together, and it feeds what I consider to be a pivot for us in terms of leaning into tourism as part of our future economic diversity strategy. So with that, I think we'll take any questions.
Let me just say thank you before we do that, Nina, and also invite the council to be as active with the task force as you would like, whether it's informally or formally. I know that Jody and Deborah have been meeting to keep you briefed, and I know that that is their intention. We invited 2 former mayors to participate as honorary co-chairs. And Mr. Mendelson, should the council want to have a formal role, I could see how we could have honorary co-chairs with Debbie and Jody from either the relevant committee or relevant member, ward member. So I will leave that to you, and we can proceed from there.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. So if the questions from members, I'm going to start with the chair of our Committee on Business and Economic Development, Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and co-chairs of the task force for this morning's presentation. I really appreciate hearing some of that. I know we've already had some conversations about some of this. And as chair of the Committee on Business and Economic Development, I do intend to continue those conversations both informally and formally within the process of roundtables before the committee. I do have a couple of questions. If you bear with me, I want to just make a really brief statement that I think is relevant. And is one of the things that I'm going to be looking at throughout this process to really guide, I think, the oversight that happens out of the committee. But more than 2 decades ago, then Mayor Anthony Williams laid out a vision that included attracting 100,000 new residents. And if you've been around long as I have, you'll remember those pronouncements when they occurred. And by most objective accounts, he succeeded, and the city's coffers benefited immensely. Prosperity flowed in the form of new residents, capital investments, and development of new buildings and revitalization of old neighborhoods. The city saw balanced budgets, surpluses, fully funded pensions, and rainy day funds. Then, 6 years ago, after 12 years in the private sector, former Mayor Williams wrote an opinion in the Washington Post where he asked a critically important question, a question that I believe should really guide the city's efforts today when we think about economic development and growth. He asked, have we worked out a way to both grow the city and make it work for everyone? And I think that's a fundamental question that should really undergird the work that this task force is doing, as well as the several plans that were mentioned, the 4 plans that are intersecting in some way. I think it was laudable for the mayor to lay out that goal when he did in 2023 to bring new residents, and we welcome those new residents. But I fear that we lost some of the pillars of our community as we added those new residents. And so, as you think about the work that is occurring, I mentioned some of the things that I've already done. I've begun a series of roundtables and meetings to look at some of these issues. I want to thank the Deputy Mayor, Nina Albert, for appearing before the committee, and some of my colleagues who appeared to talk about the future of downtown. We have some more roundtables that we're lining up to continue that conversation. But I think this is an important question, and I have a couple of questions if the chair and my colleagues will bear with me. But I believe that as a district, we're all interconnected in some way. Well, I think some people don't necessarily feel that way. I believe that we all rise or fall together. But as I stated earlier, we have to be intentional about paying attention to long-term residents and institutions. And if we think, and I think that extends to being intentional about all corridors in the District of Columbia. As we focus on Gallery Place downtown, which the mayor laid out importantly why that's essential, and I think Nina Albert mentioned why the focus on Gallery Place downtown is essential. How can we ensure that we're not slighting other areas that also need investment and people who also need to be included in this comeback in the Gallery Place revitalization in whatever the future of downtown looks like?
Well, thank you for that question, Councilmember, and it's certainly an important one. And I want to just direct your attention to one of the first plans that Deputy Mayor Albert mentioned, and that's the comeback plan, which is our 5-year economic development strategy for the city. And each one of the focus areas of that plan will allow us to create more small businesses with a focus on minority-owned businesses, and to create and increase the median incomes of DC families. And so that focus just tells us that if we're growing, we want to grow equitably, and we want people to be able to grow their income so that they can afford to live in Washington, D.C. So those were all the focus areas of the plan. I don't want to, however, lose this reality, is that if the downtown and property values in the downtown go down, so does our ability to invest in every part of the city. So both have to happen. It's not either or, it's a both and. We have to have a vibrant and growing downtown, which allows us to make critical investments in other parts of the city. I'll also say this. Places outside of the downtown taught us a very critical lesson about resilience and the need to have a more diverse base in the downtown. I dare say if we look at places in Ward 6, the Wharf, and Navy Yard, they were more resilient during the pandemic because more people lived there. And that is a lesson that we're learning from our investments all over the city that will pay dividends in the downtown.
Appreciate it. Thank you for that, Mayor. And I noted that it's also mentioned in some of the materials you provided in the slides that Deputy Mayor went over in terms of the comeback plan. I think part of what I'm getting at, though, is as we talk about the Gallery Place Chinatown Task Force and think about the work that is going to occur, very able people who are part of the task force, where do you envision the role of ordinary residents who've been here for a long time, maybe some of the institutions in our faith community and otherwise? Where do you foresee them actually having a role in guiding this process and feeling included in this process? As I look at some of the names, wow, laudable, very experienced folks who should be at the table, frankly. I don't see, necessarily at this point where some people who guide some of the institutions that have been instrumental to our communities over the years, again, faith-based, some of the other organizations that work grassroots, people who live in other parts of the city that are not downtown, how do you factor them into this process moving forward?
May I try? Oh, go ahead.
I
Mayor?
was just going to say, Councilmember, what is not listed here are all of the subcommittees that, well, they are, the subcommittees are listed, but there will be formal membership and informal membership and public engagement involved in that. So I don't think anybody should expect that every person or stakeholder group can be on a steering committee. Steering committees, by definition, have to be small and focused. But I think that the team has very ably outlined the buckets of work that have to be done in ways that people can stay engaged in that process.
I'll just say, so this is actually akin to a very traditional or typical planning process where we need right now to ideate and brainstorm and really pull. There's a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach, and the two have to happen together to come up with the plan that works for our city. And so right now, the work that's being kicked off is really ideating from people who've seen world-class destinations, because that's our aspiration. But you mentioned our obligation and also where our heart is, which is to make sure that the people of the District of Columbia, residents, workers, see themselves, have opportunities in what this new destination may be. So the process right now is really to go through that, ideating and thinking big, and then we'll be ready, I think, with concepts that have feasibility to them to then really engage community, to the people who are thinking comprehensively and care comprehensively about what this neighborhood becomes, and that there are opportunities for all. So I think it's a process more than necessarily thinking of the task force composition as a strict or limited inclusion. It's just what we have to do to be able to derive and develop concepts that we can present and get that community feedback on.
Okay, I appreciate it. This is the last one, Chairman. I can't have a conversation, as I'm sure a lot of the folks around this table probably share the experience, but I can't have a conversation today in the District of Columbia about economic development and business without talking about crime and violence and hearing anecdotes about things that are occurring across the city. And I think it's important both in the context of what I just mentioned and making sure that people across the District of Columbia, regardless of the background, somehow feel included in this process, and that leaders who represent some of those communities aren't an afterthought. And I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing from the mayor and from the deputy mayor about that, and look forward to working with you on that. I say that because I think it's important to understand that we really need to ensure that we preserve and bolster the community and the institutions that undergird the community as we think about our future economic growth. When it comes to crime, I think frequently, government, it acts in silos. And I'm not casting aspersions on the executive. I think the council, in its own right, sometimes operates in silos where committees, although well-intended, don't always communicate the best. I had a roundtable of sorts about public safety a while ago, and I was sure to invite my colleague who chairs the Judiciary Committee and represents Ward 2, given her background and her interest in all the work that she's doing, to make sure that there's a level of coordination and communication occurring. Can you all talk about what kind of coordination and communication, and maybe this bleeds into the second part of this meeting, but how you plan to integrate public safety in the work that is happening about downtown? We've heard Ted Leonsis and others reference crime around Gallery Place. What does that look like as you all map out this process, and how do you plan to ensure that you're addressing issues around crime and violence and public safety as you think about the work that's going to take place at the task force?
So let me lead this off. Deputy Mayor Appiah here is anxious to answer that question. We have a very strong partnership. This is a whole of government approach. It has to be. As for the task force, there's no substitute for the role of government in responsibility for crime and safety. What the task force is doing, and why it's so important to include the downtown DC bid and the Golden Triangle bid, is because of what is a clean and safe agenda, and so they're there to help coordinate and make asks of the government and say, hey, these are really important areas within downtown that require a certain type of focus. The business community, I'm not speaking for the entire business community, but many have expressed a desire to and a willingness to invest in this because it's so important to them. So I think that the task force itself is to generate ideas, identify solutions for how the business community and government can work together to address what I call clean and safe. Clean, that predictability that Jody spoke about, is really important to a customer or to somebody walking on the streets, because not everything is public safety. Sometimes it's perception, sometimes it's a feeling that there's care given to a street or to an area. And so that's why the relationship and the identification by the business community of things that they know patrons to the neighborhood, to their businesses, is really important to understand. But on this task force includes government people so that when it starts to become a public safety concern, that there's a response and a direct communication. I think that this way of working, that the task force includes some of our experts in Deputy Mayor Pia's cluster, get included, and I'll turn it over to her to see if there's anything else that she wants to add. But this is a whole of government approach.
Yeah, there really isn't. I mean, the reason you see both of us sitting here in these two topics is we recognize the interconnection between the vitality of our downtown and all parts of our city and public safety. Deputy Mayor Albert and I meet very regularly, and actually all the deputy mayors, to discuss the fact that we all play a role in one of these work streams one way or the other. There's no separation between us. And as Deputy Mayor Albert said, clean and safe, we've worked with myself, the chief, and our other government partners over the course of the year, even prior to the launch of the task force, on work in this area and other parts of the city that we recognize that public safety looks like good lighting and making sure that trash is picked up and all of those things that are a real whole of government approach to addressing crime. And so that work is ongoing and really folding into the work that we've already been doing, certainly with the downtown bids and the bid council across the board. So.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mayor Bowser and your team and the task force for a daunting task to ensure that we can stabilize and grow our downtown. I guess for me, some of the biggest concerns I have about downtown is just access to safe space to go shop, right? As a Washingtonian, as an African-American Washingtonian, downtown has changed drastically. In a good way at some point, and now not so much good way as I think about this area. Let's just be honest, it's written with a lot of crime, a lot of drug usage. In fact, the last 2 times I came here for a major event at the arena, my car was broken into, window bust open, and it wasn't just isolated with me. It was over 30 people whose car was broken into at those 2 events. And then another issue, Mayor Bowser, I have a question about access to parking. It's becoming more cumbersome to travel in D.C. Instead of going to our neighbors' jurisdictions to park. I was walking in here this morning after parking my car, and I took a picture of this. You probably can't see it, but it's like a piece of artwork in the street. And so we've eliminated a lot of our parking in the district, from bus lanes to bike lanes to streeteries to this art display. And people are trying to make a decision: do I go shop here with fear of getting a ticket while I shop here, or pay $25 to park? And so the issue there's a piece in here that speaks to getting our residents to a population of 725,000, and increase economic prosperities in D.C. by lifting the median household income of black residents to 25,000. My question is how? There has been a number of initiatives that's been touted for black and brown people in the district that I haven't seen really come to fruition. In fact, according to the 2020 census, we've lost 20,000 African American people in the district, and black people just don't feel, I'm going to just say this, based on my opinion, don't feel included in the economic growth of the district. And we talk about the businesses. This says increase in share minority-owned employer businesses to 33%. I just want to hear more clarity on how do we get there, because some of the business issues is access to capital, technical support, and really getting support from the district to help grow their businesses. I know in Ward 8 we've gained some restaurants, but we've also lost 3 restaurants in Ward 8 on the MLK corridor. And while this is a noble task ahead, I just want to hear more specifics about how do we get these minority businesses to participate. There's some tangible things you can give me. It give me some ease and some ability to support.
Well, thank you for that question, and I am happy to have the Deputy Mayor give you a full briefing. But certainly in the last 10 years, Councilmember, I'll give you one example. We've increased, just as the District of Columbia government, our investment in our CBE community in partnership with our CBE community, where we were spending $300 million a year with CBEs. Now we're over $1 billion a year. Our grant programs that have been very
CBEs doesn't mean black businesses, though, Mayor.
well, and many of them are, and we're happy to share with you the ones who are or the ones who aren't. But those are our local businesses, and when we're able to preference our local businesses, the chance that they are Ward 8 businesses or black or brown businesses increases. And so we've been able to increase a substantial amount of opportunity for those businesses. We've had grant programs as well as technical assistance programs, as well as programs to work with people who have criminal justice background to also start businesses. So there's really no place. We were with members of the council last week where a franchise owner spoke to the council about his experience in D.C. And he, just as a person who's done business around the country, said there was no better place for a minority-owned business to start or grow than Washington, D.C. So our programs, like if you compare them to other major jurisdictions, are really second to none for small and minority businesses. But the council member raised another point that I think bears some attention, because there are a lot of policies, and some from this body, some from DDOT and others, that have advanced an agenda where we have a transportation system where we concentrate on sharing modes of transportation. So our investments in metro, in bike lanes, and other alternative means of transportation are important. I think your question about parking and having the task force have some attention to parking and recommendations around where we are with parking in the downtown and other places for a larger discussion is important, and we should put it on the table.
Yeah, I just thank you, Mayor Bowser, for that response. Just want to note on the CBE, there are a number of CBEs in the district that are not, as you know, they are out-of-town businesses getting licenses in D.C. And using the CBE status to get the leg up on contracts. We've seen it over and over again. It's been in the newspapers and things like that. And we've also seen, because of that, based on the law, especially around construction, they have to spend a certain amount of money in construction on CBEs according to whatever type of development project it is. But if they have a development partner who's listed as a CBE, I know one in the district, I'm not going to say no name, that's getting a tremendous amount of money. They're not a minority business. They have managed to get a CBE license, but they're eating up a lot of the revenue that can go to smaller minority businesses. And the minority businesses complain over and over again. I know Councilmember McDuffie can attest to this, not getting paid on time. And so while the narrative may be true in some instances, there are a lot of instances come to my desk that it's not working out. Even when the home ownership you mentioned Navy. I was in Navy Yard today. I saw 3 cars with boots on them this morning, right? And I don't know the reason behind it, and it could be justified, but I'm just saying it's been getting harder and harder to live in the district for an average working class person in the district, especially black and brown.
Well, council member, if you don't like the booting policy of the district, this body can change it.
Absolutely.
Okay, but that hasn't happened. And the policy of the district is if you owe, and I don't have to remind you of the intense conversation around people who have unpaid tickets and how people with unpaid tickets may be dangerous drivers, and how more dangerous drivers mean more people getting killed in car crashes in the district. So that's how we arrived at the policy. But I don't want you to
So
talk
not all
as if you
tickets
don't have
involve
anything
driving,
to do
some
with it.
involve parking. So a lot of times
Some of them do.
we
That's
use that
true.
narrative to blanket about public safety when it's not all the same thing. But I'm gonna digress for the sake of this
Yeah,
conversation.
but I don't want you to get off the point. If it's important to you, you should change it.
Oh, I got bills, Mayor Bowser, and I
Okay.
implemented a bill about what was it? Ticket amnesty in 2018, in which you implemented in 2020. So I do have several bills. I know the council has bills as well that we will be
And
moving
that
forward
was a
with.
very successful program.
And I look forward to getting your support again because I want to introduce it again, Mayor Bowser. we got a lot of revenue back because of that, and
We
give a lot of
did.
people relief to go
We have another
feel
couple of
comfortable.
council members.
Okay,
and then we're going to
perfect.
be so far behind. Councilmember Everlight?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mayor, and to your team, and to Jody McLean and Deborah Ratner-Salzberg for being part of this. I think it is difficult to underscore how important this moment and this project is, the future of downtown, which is the economic anchor for the district. So everything that we want to do in terms of social services, safety nets, housing incentives, relies on us getting this right and having a strong economic base. I think that we are at a pivotal moment in history, the district, but also other mid-sized and small cities, because reality is cities are not going to be, again, what they were in 2019. Remote work started before the pandemic, accelerated significantly during the pandemic. That's not going to go backwards. We're always going to have remote workers, I think, to the end of time. AI has started to change some job prospects. There's customer relations, coding, so many things that took a lot of really smart people to do just a few years ago. You really don't need many people at all to do them. So it is changing the landscape in terms of the demand for leases and the size of leases. What I want to make sure we are doing is creating a plan that future-proofs our city. So people going into the office 3 days a week is not likely enough economic activity to sustain the surrounding businesses. So over time, that's going to have an impact on those businesses, and these types of things, if we don't have a good handle on them, spiral. And so as we think about what the future of our city is, what the future of other small and mid-sized cities are, we have to face head-on the reality that office markets are not going to be what they were, and then ask ourselves the question, what are we going to do from there? Now, I've been talking about office to residential conversions and other retrofits since 2016, long before the pandemic, when we had already historically high vacancy rates. Now they are much higher. And so in response to where we are now, there's no doubt we're going to spend a lot of money on conversions and incentives. What I want to make sure is that this taxpayer money is optimally spent. So if buildings scattered across a big downtown convert to housing, that doesn't create new neighborhoods. We have to make sure we have efforts that concentrate the residential development so that we can create the other amenities around there that they need. And I want to make sure that we are, in the whatever plan we develop, really contending with the reality that the city just won't be back to where it was in 2019. And to that end, I hope that we will consider creating and empowering a body like a local downtown redevelopment corporation that has the vision of the city, specific directives, specific metrics that we're going to measure it by, and the right authority to make these things happen. Because what we can do at this time in history is pretty incredible, but we're going to have to be really aggressive in how we do it, and I think contend with the reality of where technology and office demands are taking us.
You looking for a response?
I hope there's some response. Like, yes, we're looking at that. You know, people like Richard Florida, Dror Polak, they're talking about these things, and I think they're right about a lot of points. But as we sort of face this has to be a plan that doesn't look like past plans, because it's going to impact us for decades.
Jody or Debbie, if you want to respond.
So I did mention that we have a Big Ideas
Right.
Roundtable, and that's strictly to address what you are talking about. I mean, it is big ideas, what else can we do? But it's also, what are you thinking about? What's happening? What's changing? What will the future of the city look like? So in setting the table and doing these roundtables, that's absolutely right in the front of our thinking.
Yeah.
Councilmember McDuffie, you wanted to say something?
Just briefly, I appreciate Councilman White raising the question about an independent authority. It is one of the questions that I actually asked at the roundtable on the future of downtown. I don't know if the deputy mayor wants to provide the response she provided on the record, but I noted in raising this, because I've talked to Councilmember Allen about it before, I know other council members and I have chatted about it. It's not novel, right? There's been such authorities in the District of Columbia in the past, including the Anacostia Waterfront Corporation, NCRC. They no longer exist. And I think you have to have a willing participant in terms of the executive in order to make those things function the way that you might think it should function, and perhaps the way it's functioned in the past. I think it's a pretty good idea that's been discussed, but I really think that everybody should understand the response I got and how the executive is thinking about it.
Last question, Charles Allen.
Thanks. Ms. Mayor, thank you very much. And I appreciate the folks you've tapped to be on the task force and the hard work you guys are doing. I know I've been able to sit down with a couple of you to talk through a couple of things. I am very glad that when we think about our downtown, that we are defining that, including Union Station, to more of what we consider our traditional downtown. As we think about the parts of Ward 2 and Ward 6 that comprise that area, I think it's just crucial, so I appreciate that that is a key piece there. I think one thing that I don't see outlined in here, perhaps this is not necessarily the charge of this task force, but I think it's got to be said when we talk about our downtown comeback and our revitalization. It's not going to happen without making sure that WMATA is serving our residents, serving our businesses, that we put WMATA on stable footing. So that may not be the task of this, but I just want to make sure that we're saying that, because we are doing a lot of hard work. I appreciate the mayor, City Administrator Donahue, and the chairman, myself, working very collaboratively on those solutions. But it's got to be a key part of what our downtown is going to look like, is what our transportation and transit is going to look like in that space. And so I guess to that respect, with Union Station being listed here as part of that downtown plan, just want to see if you want to talk, and Jody McLean, I know the work that you've done just to the north of Union Station, understand how important that space is. Endeavor, we work together on a lot of spaces. That massive transportation node in the future, what is really not just going to be something that serves the neighborhood, but really will serve the entire Mid-Atlantic region with this vision of where we're going to go with Union Station. How important do you see that knitting into what the future of our downtown looks like?
Do you want to address it?
I'll just kick off with one thing, and then I think Jody and Debbie can add. Let me underscore that this city's great economic advantage is the metro system. The question is, how do we make it sustainable financially for our region? Our portion of the metro system functions much more like a subway. It requires, we have as a city and as a jurisdiction, I think, a different requirement for metro than, for example, an outlying jurisdiction. So I think that is a conversation that is being led by others. But Chinatown Gallery Place in particular is has, I think, access to 5 lines minimum, if not 6 metro lines. Again, it's only akin to L'Enfant Plaza in terms of access to the region. And so we just obviously recognize it. I think we as a city recognize the importance of metro and the role that metro plays for the city on an economic development perspective, just critically important. So that's, I think, why the executive and the council has
Sure.
been in partnership about
Yes,
this.
and we will, obviously, we're going to pay our fair share. And we not only want to focus on a kind of a year of stabilization, but a long-term solution, which will require our commitment. I'll say this about Union Station. We think that's the true regional project that all of the Maryland and Virginia and D.C. need to collaborate on. I know that's the view of the federal government. It's a true regional asset that's going to take many billions of dollars to advance. So it continues to be at the forefront of our thinking. But I would suggest, I know that you're leading the COG this year, that this would be a great project for COG to kind of galvanize support for a regional investment in the transformation of Washington Union Station.
Well, good news there.
Okay, good.
Thank you. So I know there's some other council members who have questions, but it's 10:30. We're supposed to go until 11, and I have a hunch that we're going to be more than a half an hour on public safety. So why don't we turn to public safety?
Okay. Deputy Mayor and City Administrator, if you would.
Yes, so as the mayor said, we certainly recognize that when we're talking about the vitality or flourishing of our city, that we cannot do that without talking about really driving down crime, increasing safety for our visitors and our residents across the city. So we are going to spend some time, you can go to the next slide, talking about where we are. We talk about data, but I also want to say at the outset that we recognize that data tells a story, but not the full story, because we never want to, we're always mindful of the individual experience of our residents as well. And then we'll look at where we are in our public safety ecosystem, which you hear us talk about a lot, that we are an interconnected system, and the health of the system is dependent upon the health of each part. We'll talk about some ways in which we are working to drive down crime, and then some ways we can work together to hopefully rebalance some parts of our public safety ecosystem. Next slide, you can go to. So you can go to the next slide. So we know there's no, I know that we are all aware that last year was a really challenging year. This is where we ended. We were up 39% in violent crime last year. We were up 24% in property crime and up 26% overall. And so certainly, you know, each of those, whether property crime or people losing lives or being traumatized, that represents individuals who are impacted and the ripple effect of that. And so we don't take lightly those numbers at all. We do, it is worth acknowledging that in the latter part of the year, we had peaks, we hit very high peaks in crime in July and August, but that as we moved into the fall, that we started to see pretty precipitous decreases in crime. And so you can go to the next slide. We have started this year continuing to see those trends. And so through yesterday, you can see that we're down 6% in violent crime. We are down 8% in property crime and 8% in total crime. I point out, because certainly gun crime is a significant issue that drives our homicide across the city, that we are down 32% right now in assault with dangerous weapon. The chart on the right-hand side, the 30-day comparisons, show you basically the 30-day period from November 29th through December 29th compared to the next 30-day period, which is December 29th through January 28th. And so we continue to see that trend of over 30-day periods, continued reductions. And so the 30-60 there is we're down 7% in violent crime, 13% in property crime, and overall 12%. So we can go to the next slide. As we're here in Chinatown, it's important, we thought it important to address what the trends are that we're seeing here. And so you can see a year-to-date look back. In violent crime, there has been an 88% decrease between this, where we were year-to-date last year and year-to-date this year, and a 11% decrease in property crime. And then the same trends that we just pointed out in the overall picture of the 30-60 we're seeing here in Chinatown as well, that the reductions on the right-hand side are when you're comparing each of the 30-day periods. And so overall, an 83% reduction in violent crime in that 30-60 and a 19% reduction in property crime. And that's as of yesterday here in Chinatown. So we can go to the next slide. One of the things that we talk about a lot, and it's important, and you hear us talk about, is the ecosystem. And so, you know, the mayor has said, you know, this is a complex system that we have, maybe one of the most complex in the country, because our mix of federal and local and otherwise. And so as we make adjustments across the system, it's important that we look how we got where we are. Last year didn't just happen in a vacuum. Certainly, there's impacts over time. And so we've done some work, and I'll turn to the city administrator to walk us through and looking at how did we get here, and where we are in the entirety of the ecosystem. And you have the charts, because it's very small, in front of you on larger sheets of paper. And I'll turn to the CA.
Good morning. I apologize for how small this looks. It's probably small printed out. So as the deputy mayor said, so this the idea of what you have, and I'm going to walk through not everything because it's a lot here, but some of the highlights of what you see here. It really came towards the middle to late December. Now, for those of you who have been in public safety, at the end of every December, there's always articles about how we ended crime. We do interviews. When I was deputy mayor, I did them for about 6 years. Typically, it's different council members, the mayor, the chief of police, the deputy mayor for public safety. And it often has the lens of the past 12 months. And the mayor and I had a conversation where she really asked me to help tell a story that stretched back beyond the past 12 months, because many of the things, at least that I see, really are much more nuanced and complex than I can put into a quick sentence or a change in trend over say, a 3-month time frame in which we saw a spike in a certain type of crime. I took the week between Christmas and New Year's off, and this is how I spent my time. And so I created a couple of visuals. It started with one, then it became a second one focused on youth. And I'll kind of just walk through what you see here. And I should say, this is sort of my observations. This isn't stress tested with academic rigor. It's what I've seen and adjustments that we've had in our ecosystem, both local and federal, overlaid with different actions in the world or actions that we've taken. And I'll kind of walk through what the data means, and I'll kind of go, the starting point's 2012 because that was our low for homicides as a city. On the right-hand side, you see a bunch of lines spreading out, and that's 2023 year-end numbers. And the lines change based on how basically they have evolved since 2012. And then I have the data labels that reflect what we saw in each year. And I'm just going to kind of walk from top to bottom on the right-hand side of what we saw. It starts with homicides, which is as needed the focal point, and we had over 270 homicides last year, a high we've had in a long time, certainly a high since 2012. You see that line go up and down. There was the spike that we saw in 2015, often really the summer of 2015, that spurred tremendous dialogue about how we respond to increases in violent crime. It went down for a couple of years, then you see a pretty consistent rise culminating in 2023. The number below that, which ends in 3,135, is the number of guns MPD has recovered. Not the total number of guns in the city, but MPD recoveries. MPD strategies has changed, but their focal point has always been collecting guns. So anecdotally, we hear guns are easier to find. The data suggests that's too. If I were to replace this with ShotSpotter activity, you see the same increase in ShotSpotter activity, where the sounds of gunfire are more frequent. So we have more homicides. Guns are more prevalent in our community. The line below that ends in 3,337 was where we ended last year with the number of police we had on the force. It started in 2012 at about 3,900. If you stretch a couple of years before that, it's actually crests over 4,000 about 2 years before that. Some of that change has been adjustments we've seen in the labor market, in the desirability of new recruits to join police forces nationally. Sometimes it reflects in our budget. And in the ability for MPD to hire. If you look at our overtime numbers and how much money we spend on overtime, and you divide that hours of overtime by the number of hours in a year, we spend on overtime about the equivalent of 500 full-time officers, which is almost exactly the number that we've seen decline since 2012. Going down further, you see MPD's closure rate, something that the chairman, you mentioned frequently about year-end statistics. And closure rates is a product of both how many homicides you're closing, as well as how many homicides occurred in that year. So sometimes when there's a spike in homicides, if detectives close the same number each year, your closure rate goes down because the math that's behind that rate changes. So it was at 1.80%. It dipped down to 62% in 2015, the year we saw our first increase. It goes back up to 70%, stays about there for a while, and then dips that back down to 62 and 52% in 2023, a number we really want to understand more about and understand what can drive it back up. Prosecution rate is the one below that at 44%. And you see if you trace it back, in 2012, the prosecution rate was 70%. It stayed at between 65 and 70% for years, all the way really until 2017. The decline really didn't start with COVID. You can really trace it back before COVID. You see it in 2017 to 2018, it goes down to 60%, then down to 54%, down to 52%, down to 33% in 2022, going up to 44%. Our prosecution rates remain among the lowest in the country. There are different reasons for this, but it has a profound effect on how our ecosystem responds to violent crime and our ability to curb it. The one below this, and the final one here, is the average a head count of the number of individuals incarcerated at the DC jail. This has seen dips that have gone up and down. It was in 2012 about 2,400. It dipped down to 1,600 in 2015. It goes back up. What you don't see here is in the summer of 2020, at one point it dipped to about just under 1,100, the lowest we'd seen in a long time. It went back up, and then really this is the average for 2023. You see 1,412. Today's population is about 1,700. So in this last 5 months of last year, we saw that number start to tick up again. It says 1,412 because that's the average over the course of the year. And then the words up top, and by the way, I could include other metrics, but I just didn't. I could certainly include wealth gap in the city or in the country and see how that's changed. Truancy, it could have been included. I could have had time to trial. A number of our inmates at the DC jail are waiting for trials. So at the top hand, you see words. Maybe too small to read the font, but in the red font, there are events that happen in the world. In the black font, there are things, actions that is a system that we've taken. And so some of the things in red, you see in 2015, the Ferguson protests, which started a national debate about policing. If you go ahead to 2017, it's when we start to see more extended clips, more powerful guns at scenes. The one number I didn't have here that I think is profoundly important is the percent of people who are shot who die. Last year, we had nearly 25% of people who shot died of those gun wounds. If you looked back at 2017, 2016, those numbers, and I didn't put it on here, I probably should have, they were closer to 17 or 18%. If you take the 1,000 people who were shot in D.C., and you have an increase in the fatality rate due largely by the power of magazines and extended clips, and you say, what does that 18% to 25% or 24% translate to? Last year, it was about 55 homicides that are attributed purely to more people dying on scene who were shot. Partly that's driven by, and you see in the red here, the first ghost guns were recovered about 2019. So ghost guns you can buy online. Sometimes it was even legal because people would break it up into small pieces. We had to pass legislation trying to catch up with that market. So guns became easier because there are different ways for individuals to be able to procure guns. You could get the pieces online, watch a YouTube video, and put it together yourself. Then COVID happened, and COVID has had impacts that people, I'm sure, will study for decades to come. One practical event here is that our court system closed down to a much greater degree. I call it hibernation, and much longer than any other court system I've been able to find in the country. That's had an effect on time to trial. That had an effect on what deals prosecutors felt they had to offer when they looked at how long it would take to go to trial. We are still working through that backlog. So I didn't put all this here to judge any single action, but to kind of recognize, because I knew the mayor, the chief, and the deputy mayor do, and some of you do, these interviews at the end of the year. For us to really have a sustained improvement in our ability to curb gun crime, we have to have an honest conversation about the whole ecosystem and how to change the numbers, to me, that we see here. And I think a lot of the actions that we're taking are meant to do that. And obviously, we have a lot of federal players that are just as important as the folks around this table in doing so. But I wanted to provide that longer lens on this.
The next slide, it's important that we talk about our young people, because certainly we hear a lot about what's happening with them. We understand that they are involved in criminal activity in our city at higher rates than we've seen. The number that you see here is for 143 of the 552 young people that were arrested last year for a violent crime. That was their first arrest. And so we said this last year when that number was 300 and about 300 young people who were arrested for violent crimes. It was their first arrest. We continue to see young people being involved in more violent activity as their start, right? There's not that same level of escalation that we'd seen in the past. A couple of other points on this slide. Certainly, we had 109 young people who were shot last year and who were victims of gun violence. And then what you see here is the juvenile arrests. One of the things that I'm going to point out is that when you look at our violent crime arrests, year over year, we had seen in the juvenile, I spent a long time in the juvenile justice system, significant decreases in juveniles being arrested, and that continues. But what we've seen in the district is year over year, very significant increases in young people being arrested for violent crime. We ended last year, I have it here, I don't know why I'm looking, there, 552. In 2020, that number was 298. So we continue to increase. And the percentage of young people who are arrested for a violent crime went from 24% in 2020 to 42% last year. You can also see that the number of young people involved in or who are being arrested for firearms related activity is increasing from 124, 133, 214, 222. So year over year, our young people are involved in more, I think all crime with young people is serious, but with more violent activity and at increasing rates. And so the next slide, I don't know how much the city administrator wants to go into it, but we thought it was important to look at what was happening with our young people as well. As we know, the factors that lead to their involvement in criminal activity is, somewhat, there are some that are the same, but some that are really specific to them.
I'll be quicker with this one. So after doing that adult ecosystem chart you saw, I still had a couple of days off, and so I said, let me plow into some youth. And I didn't know what I'd see, but I asked for some data polls, and I'll sort of walk through, because as the deputy mayor said, and as validated by the Nick Jr. report from yesterday, while juveniles still remain a relatively small percent of the number of homicide victims, it is much higher than it once was, and the increase is more rapid than the increase you've seen in adults. So in 2012, and this is really the second line from the top, and I'll just want to go top to bottom otherwise, we had 19 young people who were killed last year as homicide victims. There were 3 homicides victims that were juveniles in 2012, so a profound increase. The change that we've seen overall in crime across the city when it comes to carjackings, robberies, crimes involving cars, quite frankly, car break-ins, stolen cars, unauthorized use of a vehicle, is disproportionately impacted by juveniles perpetrating those crimes. So we have seen changes there. The top number, and sometimes we're still collecting number because multiple police agencies can make arrests, so it takes a moment to really get year-end data when we have to pull from some of the federal agencies. But in 2022, we had 124 juveniles arrested for carjacking. That was 5 in 2012, profound increase. 2023, the number is approximately around what it was in 2022. Unauthorized use of a vehicle or stolen cars, which can be interchangeable. If a car was carjacked, but police don't have probable cause to know who did the carjacking, the charge might be UUV or stolen cars. So they're similar or cousin crimes. The number of youth arrested in 2012 for that was 146. We had 177 in 2022. 2023, I believe, is going to tick a little bit up to closer to 200, so a bit of an increase, but a really profound increase we've seen in young people being involved in carjackings. Now, this is, I'm going to keep going down, this is actually contrasted with an overall reduction in the number of juveniles arrested. So we had 3,000 juveniles arrested in 2012, it was about 2,000 last year, as low as 1,400 during the COVID period. Partly that was changes in policies MPD put in right before COVID kicked in which there's joint discussions with the OAG prior to making an arrest. Partly it was changes that were affected by police since COVID. But an overall reduction in kids entering the system, but a real increase in things like carjackings and some of our more serious crimes. The one here that I knew anecdotally, and it's the one at the very bottom, is what happens after a kid's arrested. And for the most part, they're not going to DYRS. So DYRS at one point in 2012, it had 850 people. If you go before that, it's just over 1,000. And so it was customary when a juvenile was arrested and prosecuted that DYRS was seen as effectively the agency for which the juvenile will be committed to. And New Beginnings was opened in 2000, about 2009. YSC has always been the same size. So it's not as if DYRS had larger facilities then. They were large part, most of the juveniles were in community supervised by DYRS. So I assumed that they were going to court social services. So we got their numbers, and their numbers also seen a decrease. That's the one right below the very bottom. So we went from 850 youth at DYRS to about 100 and change over the past couple of years. CSS has also saw a pretty substantial decrease in their caseload. So to me, and this is like my hypothesis, is that what this shows in what's not here is what happens to kids after they're arrested and after they're prosecuted. We've had a transformational shift in how we, as an ecosystem, have responded to violent crimes perpetrated by juveniles, and they often go to OAG. That effectively has become our supervision agency for many youth that are part of the system. In that the youth who are committing and prosecuted for some serious crimes, they're not going to DYRS for the most part in any large numbers. And CSS, our court-based supervision agencies, not seen a requisite increase in their caseloads. And so part of this, and I'm not judging that, by the way, I'm just pointing out that I wanted to have a line here for what the deferred disposition agreements looked like, how many of them there were. And partly this is meant to prompt, to make sure we have honest conversations about what's happening in the system. And when we make a transformation in how we handle juvenile who are adjudicated for serious crimes, to make sure we're having a full conversation about what are DYRS's outcomes, what are the OAG's outcomes, what are court social services outcomes, and making sure we are sharing and coordinating so that all the tools in the toolkit we're using to full effect, and we're sharing about and learning about what's working and what's not working. And so I tried to talk shorter for that one, but I'll turn it over for a few minutes to you, Deputy
Yeah,
Mayor.
so I'm going to move quickly through these because I know there are questions. I think it's important to talk about, as we looked at our ecosystem, what are some of the things we're doing around that is helping us to drive down crime, and what more can we do together to continue to see those trends and to reverse some of the things that we saw in the ecosystem. So what you have next are some of the initiatives you've heard about from MPD and our systems of support around good policing and case closure. So we continue to conduct our traffic safety compliance checkpoints, which are really important for a number of reasons. You can see that you can see the numbers here. It does result in, for us, sometimes arrests and gun recoveries. And then one thing that people might not know is that we also distribute, or MPD distributes, car seats. When they're doing that, if they see that a family or a car stopped has a child who should be in a car seat. So I wanted to point that out because it really is about community safety, not simply about arrests. There's only been 6, but it's important, as we've seen increases in our traffic fatalities, that we really do everything that we can collectively to bring those down and also to get guns off the street. You also have likely heard we're launching our real-time crime center, which I've had the opportunity to go with the chief to real-time crime centers in multiple cities, and we already the work that we're doing really place us far down the field, but we feel deeply confident that with the investment that's been put in relationships with our federal and local law enforcement partners, that we have an opportunity to really address and drive down crime in a real-time way. The mayor and I were just with Executive Assistant Chief and to talk about the tragic events yesterday, and one of the things Chief Carroll said is that we recognize that with our partnership yesterday, even in information sharing, we were able to identify a suspect working together with our partners, but that this real-time crime center will put all of the partners that you see here in a space together that will allow real-time information sharing, which is critical in a city like ours that is regional and where, the crime or the issues in PG County don't stop at PG County or Fairfax County. That we are all affected, and so we are on track to launch in February for that. And removing guns from community, this continues to be, as the mayor said, we have too many guns and we have too many people willing to use them. The chief is currently working with chiefs along the I-95 corridor in where we all share the same sort of gun trafficking issues. And one of the things that she said to me, I was speaking to her yesterday about it, is the New York police were basically shocked at the number of guns that were recovering in the District of Columbia. They're like, how are you recovering over 3,000 guns a year? But we are, and I would say that you see the numbers this year and last year, that is up from 2,100 in 2021. So a tremendous amount of weapons in the district. And then you can see the stats. As the city administrator said, ghost guns, I think we recovered our first in 2019, and it was about 19 that year. We're up to 407 that were recovered last year of ghost guns. Glock switches, so that people know, those are a very, very simple switch that turns a gun into a fully automatic weapon. So, you know, we recovered 195 of those, and that's where you see so many multiple people being shot and otherwise. But we're focusing our efforts on getting guns. And also, I just point this out, the got guns, because we need our community's help to help us get guns off the street. And so, you know, having a tip line and otherwise, we're always thinking of ways to really be in partnership. Next slide. And then certainly it's critical, and we know how important it is to have a highly functioning forensic system to allow us to move to case closures and build good cases. So we are pleased certainly that under Dr. Diaz's leadership and with the hard work of the scientists at DFS, that our applications for reaccreditation for forensic biology and forensic chemistry were approved in December. And I would note this because I don't know if it's been said, was 0 nonconformities, which is something ANAB says they hadn't seen in at least 6 years. And so we know, like, the quality of the lab is critically important. And I would also note, we recognize that at accreditation, like, we also need our partners to be on board with us. So we have worked closely with the U.S. Attorney all throughout this process, and opened up the lab and the books so that you know, we are being transparent and able to really work together. I note this, that one of the things that reaccreditation has done for us is it's allowed us access to these federal resources, which they will now date back to the date of the loss of accreditation, giving us resources year over year, and that will help us to enhance our capacity to move through the backlog and hire additional DNA analysts. So that has already been unlocked for us. And then the last piece that we'll talk about, you saw us talk about changes in the ecosystem. We know that it's going to take all parts of that. We certainly are working closely with you all, with our federal partners, our local partners, and everybody, because we know that everybody is focused on making sure that our city is safe. So the next slide is there's a bit of work that we can talk more about, but I just put some of the things that we're doing to enhance our federal partnerships. You've seen a discussion of shooting reviews, and we are having those. That's PSA, CSOSA, who are supervision agencies, Court Social Services, DYRS, representatives from both of the VI organizations, and we do a lot of work ahead of those each week with our actual VIs to help us to review every shooting so that we're able to share information with our law enforcement partners for the purposes of stopping retaliatory shooting, which is really important in our city. There was an announcement from the Department of Justice that they'll be adding additional resources to help us with case closure and also prosecution. And then some of you may be aware there was a Court of Appeals ruling that very significantly affected the ability of CSOSA to use GPS monitoring for individuals under their supervision. And so we have met with our partners at the Department of Justice, the U.S. Parole Commission, CSOSA, on the Hill, to and certainly council as well, to come up with holistic solutions to ensure that we're able to address that. And then the last thing, obviously, you heard the mayor say it, we appreciate the partnership of council in policy. Next slide. And the Summer Prioritizing Public Safety Emergency Amendment Act has been incredibly, we believe, a part of what in that latter part of the year helped us to bring down crime. And so we know that certainly that the council is moving with all urgency on a host of public safety proposals. I know I participated in about a hearing a week throughout the fall. And I say this, that literally hundreds of our residents also participated in those hearings to make their voices heard of their expectation and hopes that we will work together to really find solutions that will allow them to both be safe and also people want to feel safe, right? And we want that for people. So we appreciate that council will be taking this up expeditiously. And so with that, I have spoken extremely quickly, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a picture of what's happening in public safety. It's the handhelds.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a couple questions. I'm going to Councilmember Pinto. Mr. City Administrator, you noted that prosecutions were down. Is that possibly because the number of FTEs at the U.S. Attorney's Office is down? They're doing a lot of January 6th prosecutions. As far as I know, their budget's opaque. Do you have a sense of whether it's a personnel issue?
I think it's a good question. So I did spend time trying to understand more about what might be behind it. And there's different hypotheses that one can logically come up with, but I don't have the data to be able to suggest whether it's valid or not. Part of me even including it, though, is it raises questions. So at first I started, quite frankly, with I look internally, what did the lab have something to do with it? And the lab losing its accreditation, it does have an effect. It actually does not, in my judgment, have an effect on the ability for evidence to get tested at serious gun crimes. It does affect burglaries, car break-ins that you're not going to outsource testing for. I looked at whether or not there was an effect on the number of FTEs focused on DC crimes. I didn't have any data about that. So this is partly a chart not meant to answer all the questions, but it's sort of being very open about what it raised for me, and it did raise some of the questions that you've asked here that I don't have answers for.
Then we're not having a deterrent effect. But I noted the chart, the decline started in 2017, and I was kind of trying to do the math. That's the first year, second year of the Trump administration? I guess insinuation there, and I have no data behind it, but I'm wondering if there's a resource issue. Let me go to my second question, then I'll turn to Councilmember Pinto. Mayor Bowser, there is a fiscal impact to the Secure DC bill, and if I remember correctly, it's maybe $40 million over 4 years over the financial plan. Will you be fully funding that in the budget that you submit?
My commitment is to work with the council on those things that can advance with this budget. And I haven't examined the fiscal impact for every aspect of it. But Councilmember Pinto, in pulling it together, I think really moderated the cost in a way that is going to help it get funded. So I don't have on the top of my head every element or every line in that element. But with all, I don't know how many pages in numbers of interventions there are. Many of them are cost neutral. So they will advance. Some other things we will have to fund.
Councilmember Pinto, since you show the committee, if you have questions.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Thank you all so much for all of your continuous work and for the recognition. I think especially evident on these two topics today, how pressing it is that we help Chinatown and Gallery Place recover now and for the long term, and recognize its intersection with public safety, both for this area and across our city. So thank you all. A couple questions that came to mind during the two presentations. The first I want to ask Deputy Mayor Albert if you can speak about the strengths of our theater district and how that opportunity is going to play into the role of the task force.
Sure. So I have been learning lots of fun facts about the District of Columbia. One of them is that we have the second most number of theaters in the country, second only to New York City. I just also learned that National Theater is nearing its 200-year anniversary and is also the second oldest theater in the country. These are gems, and what's fabulous about theater is that it's not limited. I mean, it attracts a broad audience of all ages. It's for children all the way to seniors. It's comedy all the way to drama. And our theaters in this city are just incredibly dynamic. A lot of plays and productions get launched here before they go to Broadway, and there's a deep track record of that creative economy here. And so to me, theater is one, but there's other kind of arts and cultural elements that to me is not only part of our history and already like a fantastic base of activity, but becomes what we build on to diversify again that and grow that tourism industry. On the task force, and it's not just all about the task force, but it's about who we're including in these conversations through roundtables and other communication, are the major cultural anchors and assets, which include the Portrait Gallery. We've engaged the Smithsonian, and they're really excited about this work. Shakespeare Theater is on the executive committee. Eileen Fuchs from the National Building Museum. There's Woolly Mammoth. There's, Warner, Ford's Theater, and others. These communities of people are not just in their buildings, but they can also bring an activation solution for outside, too, in the public space. And they've all been sort of clamoring and anxious to bring, Shakespeare onto the steps of the Portrait Gallery, to think about F Street between 7th and 9th as being a public space that extends and brings outside, offerings. So they are a big part of the solution because they have program now that they want to offer to people today. And so they are being brought in. They're part of our activations work that's immediate. They're also part of our visioning work that's longer term.
Thank you so much for that. And in terms of the other government functions that are going to touch needs in Chinatown and Gallery Place, how are we going to move forward on interventions that are needed around drug use and activity that we see go on around this area? There's been conversation in recent years about the need for more police officers here, perhaps reopening a substation here. In the interventions that are kind of quasi-economic development or public safety, like with behavioral health, how are those needs for immediate stabilization going to be incorporated right away?
So part of the clean and safe agenda is really, this is an area where government interfacing strongly with our bid partners. We already, and you've heard us talk a bit over the past 2 years about our public safety task force work and how we're bringing together our agencies on a regular basis this year. We meet Wednesdays, Thursdays, and actually all through the weekend to really address some of the collective, issues that you're talking about. On one side, enforcement on traffic and parking and all of those things. On the other side, really supporting DBH and DHS as a collective in regular outreach in areas where we know it's impacting public safety. And so we're exploring all sorts of different ways to do that in a sustained way, and you'll see more about that. And it is of huge import, particularly to the chief. She's very active with both Director Bazran and our partners across government, but also that from me and Deputy Mayor Bell and the other deputy mayors working together to ensure that as we're coming up with plans for any neighborhood, that it's really addressing what we see in a
Deputy Mayor, if I could jump in for a second. We want to also make sure that the police have additional tools, and I know there's been some debate among the council about one of the provisions in the Secure DC bill related to drug-free zones. So when people say that there is drug use on a street or in Chinatown, like, what do you want the police to do? You want them to walk up and say, we think that you are smoking marijuana on the street and we're going to arrest you. And we're going to arrest you and we're going to send you down and you won't be charged and you'll be back on this corner doing it again. So we have to have some sense of what and how we want very serious drug crime dealt with, but also the quality of life issues that we see with people smoking marijuana in a public place. And I think that's largely what we see in Chinatown. And quite frankly, we see smoking marijuana inside the arena, and the arena should deal with that. And so we want to make sure that we have some sense of what happens. So if that's what we're talking about, which I think it is largely, then we have to have a coordinated approach. Now, what the drug-free zone would allow, depending on what the data show about Chinatown or Raymond Recreation Center or any number of places where residents are complaining about open-air drug use or drug dealing, it would give the police an additional tool to immediately stop that suspected activity.
Thank you very much. And then just lastly, I have to say on this chart, Mr. City Administrator, I think it is quite moving in a lot of ways, and I am certainly a believer that the legislative branch has an important role to play in our public safety ecosystem and are making sure that it's working as intended and as needed and in a responsive manner, and we will continue to do our part as a body to do that. I do think it's also important as we look for solutions and looking forward that we are all recognizing our role in this. And so, you know, with DFS, there's been a lot of great news lately, but I think even the phraseology of OAG and USAO discredit DFS versus DFS lost its accreditation. I worry about that mentality as we look forward for additional solutions to make sure that we are all recognizing what more we can do with information sharing with our students, with truancy, with urging CSSD to be more responsive to the challenges that we need with when conditions of release aren't met. And so I know you mentioned some of those, but I do want to make sure we all stay focused on these pressing issues, on what each of us can do in our lane and also collectively. And the way that we present this information is one way to do that.
I appreciate your feedback, and without dwelling, I did think about the phraseology. The discrediting occurred prior to, and there was sort of open discrediting. And I think they would say well-founded discrediting, but it predated the loss of accreditation and made it difficult for evidence at DFS to get used even before it lost its accreditation. The loss of accreditation absolutely had an effect on closure rates and an effect on prosecution rates. Generally, evidence found at scenes of homicides and gun crimes was tested. When we really had the lab humming in 2016, 2017, where we saw real increases in closure rates was crimes like burglaries, car break-ins, and robberies, for which is more difficult given limited private sector capacity to outsource that information. And I would expect now that with the lab humming again, we would see a similar effect for those crimes for which is more difficult to outsource that evidence.
Thank you. Councilmember Robert White.
Bill picked up on something I was going to raise as well, which is, you know, a lot of this still looks like finger pointing, and I think we've got to move away from that and be really serious about how we address public safety, because we do all have a role to play, and the OAG didn't discredit the lab. The lab lost accreditation, and we've got to face that if we're going to fix these issues. But I also want to make sure as we talk about the whole of government approaches and the entire ecosystem, I would like to know where these charts, what these charts would show us if we looked at issues like truancy, 911 call center, poverty in this city, so that we can draw the right connections. Because if we're looking at a very limited scope of information and pulling inferences from that, then we may be missing the drivers of crime, and I think we are missing some of them. A lot of this is preventable, and we've got to be better at preventing as we think about responding. And then on the response side, Chairman Mendelson hit the nail on the head. It's prosecution. It's the consistency there. If we don't change that metric, we're going to continue to have a crime problem regardless of what we do.
If I could jump in, council member, and like I think Kevin did address all of the social determinants of crime and poverty could be added to this list. I don't think that they would track with the spike that we have seen in crime. And I've heard this kind of notion of finger pointing. So let me address it head on, because I think if none of us are willing to say that these things changed, some of them you changed, some of them may have changed, some just were all changes in the world, then we won't be able to reset the system. Now, I firmly believe that the system has to be reset. You may have a different view, but it is my responsibility to present the ways in which I think it has to be reset. I asked Kevin to show this pictorially because some people say, well, what do you mean when you say ecosystem? Or we have ecosystem fatigue. And I say don't get ecosystem fatigue because it took these many years to destabilize our system, and it's going to take many more years to stabilize our system. So this critique that is finger pointing, it just falls flat with me because I know we have a responsibility to look at the last 10 years and change it where we need to change it. Now, it's my view, and I work with all of you. I know the things that are important to you, and so some of these things I'm going to come to you and say, I think we have to reverse course on this. Other things I'm going to say, I think we can tweak this that meets your objectives, but also makes the city safer. And so to the point of whether we should say DFS was discredited or not, I'm happy to have a very long conversation with all of you about it, but that's a fact. And the fact is also true that this breakup, it happened. We're on the path to get it restored and to have evidence tested, which evidence has always been tested. Now, it's my view that there were policy choices made at the U.S. Attorney's Office related to some prosecutions that maybe we wouldn't have made if that was our responsibility. But that also happened. So this is our system. It has many levels. It has many players. There's been a lot of policy change. And now we're dealing in a world that's different. It's post-COVID. It's fewer police officers, there are more violent juveniles, and there have been policy decisions about how we address it. So we have to lay it out if we're going to speak honestly. I'm sure that you all have many critiques of things, and we have, I said, Kevin, in no certain terms should this graphic only reflect legislative initiatives or court initiatives. They also reflect executive initiatives or things that didn't go quite right. And we're all looking reflectively at how we change it. That's all. It is, as Kevin mentioned, it's not to make any judgments because you're elected to make decisions based on your values and what you think the residents of the District of Columbia do. But all of these changes added on top of each other are affecting our public safety. And so that's what I wanted to say. We've advanced some critical legislation. The council member has added it to her legislation as well, but we're not finished. And that's really what I want to communicate. And I really want to ask that, like, to the extent that you think you want to see something changed or something we got wrong, or we can change phrases here or there, then I'm happy to do that. But I feel strongly that we have to reset this system. And it's not one piece of legislation. It's not one agency. It's all of us.
I appreciate that. All I would say is, you know, in part of resetting, MPD did its own survey of why officers were leaving. And it didn't have a lot to do with the things listed here. They were very serious issues that we hear from officers that we have the ability to change and address. So if we're going to reverse course on the number of officers in D.C. and them coming and staying, we have to look at what officers are saying. The last thing I would just ask, because
Do you want to raise something about that?
I mean, I think
Some
the
key
report
points.
speaks for itself. It was done under Chief Conti, and my hope is that it's going to be picked up and responded to. So the other thing I would just appreciate a couple more words on is the drug-free zones.
Sure.
And so I'm still trying to understand. You say an additional tool, but my understanding is that doing illegal drugs is already illegal and arrestable and prosecutable, and dealing illegal drugs is already illegal, arrestable, and prosecutable. So how does making it sort of a different crime change the outcome?
Well, I wish that, and the chief is not here to address this herself, but it gives her a tool when they have an open air drug market to actually close it and prevent people from going into that open air drug market, and gives them a better ability to deploy their limited resources to address that drug market.
Councilmember Henderson?
Chairman, and thank you so much for this portion of the presentation, Deputy Mayor and City Administrator. I wanted to ask about two things as it pertains to youth. So the first is around safe passage. I think you all met as well last week with the parents from PAVE, and safe passage was a thing that came up. I know that, I guess, a year or two ago, we sort of launched the safe passage workers in a few select areas around the city. One of the things that I've been concerned with is in the few times where I might find myself around where one of these safe passage clusters are, I often see the workers who are either on their phones or standing with each other, talking to each other, very few interactions with the young people. They probably couldn't even tell you a young person's name who attends those schools. But we've seen some public charter schools who have deployed their own version of a safe passage worker, where they're individuals who actually work in the school during the school day, and therefore are able to have an established relationship that they can bring before or after school, in terms of, you know, knowing if someone had a beef in school, that they should, you know, maybe staggered dismissal, et cetera, or keep eyes on them. And so I'm wondering, now that you are running that program, Deputy Mayor, how you are thinking about retooling that program for a more effective approach.
Sure, we did a significant amount of work really working with DME, right? Like, honestly, for the past 2 years, but really starting intensively in January, in looking at what's working, what's not working. So right from our RFA process, or we really worked closely to address some of the things we were hearing from school leaders. The mayor convened a meeting of all of the principals of middle schools and junior high in January, and we were hearing many of the same things and have made adjustments. And so there's a lot of adjustments that have been made. One, we talk about accountability. Well, it's important that we're holding ourselves and those who are working on our behalf accountable. And so from accountability checks, from training, a robust training process that we undertook in August, and having monthly trainings and having communication protocols with school leaders, directly with my office, and then with our safe passage leaders and those on the ground and law enforcement. Like, really a lot of it was us creating more process and clarity of role. We believe that our credible contexts are a continuum, and really clarifying for schools and for the actual safe passage workers, credible messengers, the various, you know, VIs, what their job description and our expectation is, has been a big part of that. And so one of the main things I would say is it's always training and communication. And so that's really where we've been focused. And the thing about putting it in public safety and justice is the integration. Most of the credible contact continuum sits within a public safety and justice agency somewhere. There's really been an opportunity for us to have better communication across between safe passage VIs. Some of the people you see in school are one's leadership academy people. Some of the people you see in school are DWARS credible messengers. And so being able to have that communication amongst them is something that we've really focused on. So those are some
That's
of the
great.
things.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
And I hope we can sort of talk more about that,
Yeah.
because I think that it is very frustrating, especially since they wear those vests. So it's very visible of who they are, to then now see them not actually doing the job for which they have been hired for. The second thing that I know is becoming increasingly concerning is the decrease in age where we're seeing young people getting engaged in criminal activity. In my neighborhood over the weekend, I think there was two 11-year-olds who were armed. We had a situation where a 9-year-old was armed. Right, I don't even think you're in middle school at 9. That's elementary school. And so how are we, I don't know, that's probably not a good question for this particular setting, but it is definitely something that is at top of mind for me in terms of the decrease in age where we normally would have been teenagers who we're dealing with. Now we're dealing with children. Well, a different type of children. A teenager is still a child.
Yeah, I mean, so that really, it is, one, like, we do need to address criminal conduct, but in a 9-year-old, there's certainly, they're a part of a family, they're a part of a community, there's a lot of things going on there. And so our level of really discussion, coordination about, with CFSA, with DHS, with schools, and all of those who touch young people is something that we really are working hard on getting right. You know, some of what the mayor said is we do need some policy changes around truancy, around absenteeism, around parental accountability, which is something that every, you know, part of the city is telling us is necessary to make sure that families are engaged. But that, we can't not work until policy changes, right? Like, and so right now we have some protocols around critical incidents for certain age young people, but that really has been forming the model about how we work together, again, with, I talk a lot about the deputy mayors because ultimately we have a responsibility to make sure our agencies are working together. So with Deputy Mayor Kind, Deputy Mayor Turnage, and myself, talking about individual cases, the 9-year-old and 13-year-old who were arrested this weekend, and I will say this too, the mayor, like, is very involved when it comes to our young people and making sure that if we see two 12-year-olds, what happened? Who are they? Who are their families? Where are they in school? What do we know about them? And how can we make sure that we're addressing those in a real individual level? And that is how we'll build out our system around that. Yeah.
Thank you all for your presentation. Two main questions about downtown, Deputy Mayor Albert. Connected to what came up earlier, I'm of the mind we all have a stake in revitalizing downtown, as I expect many agree with. How are you establishing a feedback loop with district residents so that they could be a part of this process versus having an end product at the end of the year to say, this is what we've come up with? And then connected with the drug-free zones, Deputy Mayor Apia, can you speak to the scale and the scope of what you're thinking about the zones, both in terms of how many might exist at one time across the city and how frequently might they be employed across a single neighborhood? Is this something that we might see back-to-back several times in a given neighborhood to disrupt what we're seeing? And that comes from some concerns that if you establish a drug-free zone in a certain intersection or community, what stops people from going down the street? And so, Deputy Mayor Albert and Apia.
Sure. Right now we're in the process of just kind of getting organized, getting data together, and then hearing from, you know, the different roundtable groups that Debbie and Jody pull together. So I think that over the next 2 months is just kind of that work, that heads down work to get organized so that we have a way of processing ideas and opportunities. The community input, I think that there's going to be different layers of it, and there's different stakeholders, whether it's the tourism industry and the people, the arts and culture industry that have a big presence. That might be one stakeholder group. There's many residents in the area that also have expressed interest in understanding and giving feedback. So we will be setting up, just like you can imagine, a very traditional community input process when we have something to present. At this moment, we're not there yet, so we couldn't identify exactly when on the schedule. But I would anticipate a good plan is not one that publishes at the end and then wait and see how people respond to it. A good planning process includes input along the way. And so we definitely will be including community input.
And then what I would say is that because this was the law in the district for near 2 decades, we have data, and I think that the best thing that we can do is to provide some data about how MPD used them in the past, and the numbers around them, which they have. We recognize that we do work now, police work, task force work, that there is displacement, and so it doesn't help us to move criminal activity around. So certainly we're conscious of that. We're conscious of how we do outreach in advance. We're conscious of what it would look like to put a drug-free zone in an area. I mean, I think MPD is very sensitive to not wanting to move crime around. It doesn't certainly help us. And so we can provide data to you around how they were utilized in the past, and I think that is the best sort of like informer of how we go in the future. And certainly the other thing in the legislation, if you look at it, it does lay out a fairly stringent scheme of consideration of types of data and things MPD would look at before making that determination.
Councilmember Truman, and then I think we're done.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to harken back to the downtown planning. I also, we all share the urgency and the importance of making sure we have the most dynamic downtown humanly possible. I also join in with everyone in hoping that the Capitals and the Wizards stay, and but they might not. And actually, even if they do not, I can get excited about a bold vision in a post-Capitals Wizard world. So, and I don't know when we're going to know. You know, there'll be news this year, but then it would take a while. And it kind of interrelates with the public feedback piece. In the way that you talked about it, sometimes you said a concept, sometimes you said concepts. And if we're looking at the end of 2024, I'm curious your thinking about the end product and whether it's a concept or concepts. And I'll tell you in advance, my bias is it's really important that it be concepts, because I think at the end of 2024, I think there's a scenario we get the Caps and the Wizards back. But there's still another scenario we don't. And there's a scenario we work with the infrastructure that we have and we revitalize it, we repurpose the arena. I don't know what that, that's one possibility. Another possibility is that truly bold vision where we start with a blank piece of paper with the 2-block area and do something radical. And I think you want to have all of those things on the table, and you have the idea of, well, we can only do what is feasible, but what is feasible depends on what's invested. So are you thinking about multiple concepts that will be put on the table that really then can be reacted to by the whole city, not just a few people who turn up at your round tables, which is very valuable, but are you thinking about one concept, multiple concepts? I don't think you want to get to 10, but how are you thinking about what you would put on the table at the end of the year?
Well, I am the one who said concept and concepts and vision and visions, because honestly, we don't know yet. I mean, this is a process where we said we are going to be very transparent. When I looked at the schedule, I thought, I can't believe we're putting up a schedule, because we have goals, but as we go through this process, we will refine, learn, and be able to address exactly what you are asking. And when you looked at our roundtables, we talked about anchor reuse. We talked about totally different anchors for the neighborhood. We talked about housing. So we really are very much at a beginning process. The entire process will include people's reactions, responses, and community involvement. As Nina, as the deputy mayor said, we're in a planning process, and a planning process starts with gathering as much information as you can from experts and people in knowledge, and the information that's already been gathered. So that's where we're starting. We have goals. We have plans in terms of moving forward, but I don't think we can tell you today if it's visions or a vision. We initially anticipate it will be visions, and then perhaps we will be narrowing it down. But it'll totally depend on the circumstances in which we find ourselves.
And I would just add that every great vision, every great planning has multiple paths to execution. And I think that's something that you will find as we work through this and as we come back and forth with the vision, that there will always have to be multiple paths. I think about the yards, I think about Union Market, we've stayed true to our visions, but I think the execution has to look different depending on the marketplace.
We're at past 11:30. 11:35 to be exact. Mayor Bowser, do you have any concluding words? Since you're the host, actually, let me just say thank you to everyone.
I usually
and
have
you have the last word.
something that I want to follow up on. But I don't. I think that we will follow up with you, Chairman, on a deeper dive conversation. And, oh, this is the thing I wanted to mention. I wanted to mention that I'm going to carve out some time on my schedule weekly that I'll call office hours for council members, where you can call me or drop in my office. I'll try to keep it on the same day. And of course, you can reach me anytime, but that way, weekly, that's the time that I'm available. Thank you.
Thank you all.